I want you to picture yourself holding a really tiny, delicate 4-ounce teacup. It's beautiful, but I mean, it is incredibly small.
Right.
And now imagine someone hands you a massive, heavy 1-gallon jug of water and just tells you to pour the entire thing into that little cup.
It's going to be a disaster.
Exactly. What happens? You get exactly 4 ounces of water, and the rest just violently spills all over the floor. It's a complete useless mess.
Yeah.
And the thing is, every time you try to learn something new by, cramming for hours on end, you are basically pouring a gallon jug of water into that little cup.
You really are.
Your brain is literally physically built to reject 90% of what you're doing in those moments. So today we are taking a deep dive into why that happens and, more importantly, how to actually fix it.
It's a phenomenal visual, and unfortunately it's a highly accurate biological reality for most of us who grew up in traditional educational systems. We were basically taught to learn the wrong way.
Yeah, we really were. And we have a very specific mission for you today. We are looking at how to learn faster than everyone else around you. Because let's face it, we are living deep in the AI era now.
Deep in it, yeah.
Basic intelligence, like the ability to just recall facts or, summarize a PDF or write a standard report, that has become a complete commodity.
Absolutely.
Your only real lasting edge is the actual mechanics of how you learn and how quickly you can adapt. Mm-hmm. And our source material today is basically a masterclass from someone who actually lived this.
Yeah, it's an incredible story.
Right. We're looking at insights from a guy who grew up as a struggling student in Mumbai, literally failing courses, who completely reverse engineered his own brain to become an MIT grad and a highly successful CEO.
And, he didn't do it by suddenly becoming a genius overnight or finding some secret cache of inherent intelligence.
Right.
He did it by recognizing a fundamental mismatch between the tools we have and the brains we use. Look at modern artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. We see systems that can run millions of processes in parallel.
Oh, yeah. Just consuming vast oceans of data simultaneously.
Exactly. But human brains, we are strictly built for serial learning.
Yeah.
We process one transfer at a time.
Okay, let's unpack this because that brings us right back to that 4-ounce bowl analogy from our source material. Why is cramming a gallon of theory into our heads an almost guaranteed biological failure? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a lot of us just assume if we stare at a page long enough, it has to go in eventually, right?
Yeah, it's a common misconception.
Yeah.
But it really comes down to basic metabolic economics. Your brain only weighs about 3 pounds, but it is an absolute energy hog.
How much energy are we talking?
It burns up to 20% of your body's total fuel.
Wow, 20%.
Yeah. And the hungriest part of that organ is your prefrontal cortex. You can sort of think of the prefrontal cortex as the CEO of your brain. Uh-huh. It handles the complex planning, the decision-making, the active assimilation of new, difficult ideas. Every single time you try to cram a new theory or a novel concept into that region, it causes a massive spike in the demand for glucose and oxygen.
So it is literally exhausting. It's not just a psychological feeling of being tired or bored. Your brain is physically running out of the very gas it needs to operate.
Exactly. It is metabolically very expensive to operate that CEO function. That region is your tiny 4-ounce cognitive bowl.
That makes so much sense.
Right. So when 99% of learners try to master a subject by just, jamming information for 4 hours straight before an exam, they're completely ignoring their own physiology.
It's just overflowing the bowl.
Yeah. As the glucose depletes, the prefrontal cortex essentially just shuts its doors. The failure rate for long-term retention when you learn this way isn't just high. It practically approaches 100%. The brain physically cannot process the volume because it doesn't have the fuel.
Which is, frankly, a terrifying thought for anyone listening who is maybe prepping for a big presentation right now.
For sure.
But if shoving volume into the brain fails because of strict physical limits, we have to figure out how to force the brain to actually grow and adapt its capacity. And it turns out the answer requires us to confront a really uncomfortable truth.
Which is that our brains are actively lying to us about what good learning feels like.
Yes, exactly.
What's fascinating here is a study out of Carnegie Mellon University that completely dismantles how we perceive the learning process. CMU tested an adaptive learning system on their students.
And adaptive means it changes based on how they do, right?
Right. So instead of a static, predictable curriculum, the material would get increasingly difficult based on their prior success. If you got a concept right, the system didn't give you a gold star and let you coast.
It just got harder.
Exactly. It immediately pushed harder. It threw a more complex problem at you.
I can only imagine how deeply frustrating that must have been for the students. I mean, nobody likes feeling like they're constantly on the verge of failing.
Oh, they absolutely hated it. The friction was constant. They reported feeling like they were learning way less because it felt so difficult.
But I'm guessing that wasn't actually the case.
Not at all. Here is the critical part.
Yeah.
Those students who were pushed into that constant state of struggle ended up learning twice as much as the students taking the standard, comfortable tests.
Twice as much.
Yeah. And the reason they hated it is because society has conditioned us to believe that friction equals failure.
Like, if it's hard, I must be dumb.
Exactly. If a textbook is hard to read, or if we are struggling to recall a vocabulary word, we just assume we aren't learning it.
But neuroscience tells a completely different story. The source material calls it the generation effect.
Yes, the generation effect. It proves that the harder your brain has to work to generate an answer, the deeper that pathway gets wired into your neural circuitry.
Because there's a physical mechanism for this, right?
Yeah, there is. When you struggle to grasp a concept, your brain begins a process called myelination. It wraps this fatty substance called myelin around your nerve fibers, and the thicker the myelin sheath, the faster and more secure the electrical signal becomes. So when you just passively read a perfectly summarized textbook, it feels easy, right? But no myelin is generated.
The information just vanishes.
Exactly.
No.
But when you have to mentally wrestle with a concept to produce an answer, you are physically building thicker, stronger neural cables. Your brain doesn't actually hate struggle. Biologically, it hungers for it to build those cables.
Wait, I have to push back on this, because if our brain biologically hungers for struggle and friction to wire itself, why do 99% of people right now treat AI tools as a crutch instead of a coach?
That is the million-dollar question.
I mean, we are actively avoiding the exact friction we need. We take a dense book, we dump it into a chatbot, we ask it to spit out 10 bullet points, and we read them in 2 minutes.
And it feels like learning.
Right, it feels like we learned it, but based on what you're saying, we bypassed the generation effect entirely. We generated zero myelin.
Yeah, it is the great paradox of our time. We are using external parallel processors to eliminate the friction that our internal serial processors actually require to grow.
Wow.
We are treating the feeling of ease as the goal, when in reality, ease is the enemy of retention. We're essentially starving the brain of the struggle it needs to wire itself.
So we have a dilemma here. We need the struggle to build the neural cables, but we know from the 4-ounce teacup analogy that if we just dump massive amounts of complex data into our heads, we run out of glucose and crash.
Exactly.
To safely feed that hunger for struggle without overwhelming the metabolic system, we need a systematic approach to shrink the information before we consume it. And that is the first step of the protocol our source used to get through MIT. Compress.
Yes. We have to shrink them out because the limitations of human working memory are incredibly strict. Decades of cognitive research show that the human brain can only juggle about 4 independent ideas in its active working memory at any one time.
Only 4.
Just 4. If you introduce a 5th idea, it physically has to drop one of the others to make room. You simply cannot hold 50 distinct, unconnected data points in your active memory.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about someone like Magnus Carlsen, one of the greatest chess players in history.
Oh, perfect example.
When you watch him sit down at a chessboard, he isn't sitting there memorizing millions of individual specific piece movements. He's not looking at a pawn and calculating 50 independent variables.
Not at all.
Cognitive studies on grandmasters estimate they have internalized anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 patterns. They don't see a knight on e4. They see the harmony of the entire board as a single compressed unit of information.
And that is the absolute essence of compression. It is reducing vast, complex amounts of information into manageable patterns that actually fit into those 4 slots of working memory.
So how do we actually do that?
To do this yourself, there are 3 necessary steps. The first is selection. You have to be ruthless here. You ask yourself, what is the 20% of this book or this course that is going to yield 80% of the benefit?
Classic 80-20 rule.
Exactly. Because the reality of the publishing industry is that most books contain only 1 or 2 core ideas, and they're just padded out with hundreds of pages of repetitive anecdotes.
That's so true.
You identify the selective chapters that actually matter, and you read those repeatedly, ignoring the filler.
So you isolate the 20%. But an isolated fact is pretty useless on its own. I imagine it's like having a single puzzle piece. You could stare at it all day, but until you figure out how it snaps into the puzzle you've already built in your head, it doesn't really mean anything.
That is the perfect way to look at the second step, which is association. Our source cites a brilliant paper from Science magazine demonstrating a foundational rule of human cognition.
Which is?
You fundamentally cannot learn something entirely new unless you actively connect it to something you already know.
You have to anchor it.
Yes, you have to consciously ask, where have I seen this pattern before? That is exactly how Magnus Carlsen operates. He connects a novel board state he has never seen before to a historical pattern he already possesses in his long-term memory.
And once you've selected the core pieces and associated them with what you know, the third step is chunking.
Right.
To me, chunking sounds exactly like what happens when you compress a massive file on your computer. Like when you create a zip file, you aren't deleting the data. You're writing a shorthand code that tells the computer how to perfectly rebuild that massive file when you click on it. Your brain does the exact same thing, right?
Yes, that is exactly the mechanism. You take those selected associated ideas and you synthesize them into a simple model.
So not just a longer summary.
No, it shouldn't be a massive multi-page outline. It should be a drawing, a single sentence summary, a unique metaphor, or even a song. You are packing a dense amount of data into a single, easily carried mental shorthand.
And then what happens?
When you recall the metaphor, the brain automatically unpacks the entire complex theory behind it.
Okay, so you've built this beautiful, compressed mental model. I've associated it, I've chunked it. But just because I can visualize a guitar chord perfectly in my head, or I can explain the theory of coding, doesn't mean my fingers actually know how to play the instrument or type the software.
No, it certainly doesn't.
How do we bridge that massive gap between knowing a fact and actually performing a skill? Because hoarding compressed data just isn't enough. And that brings us to compiling that data and the severe difference between memory and mastery.
This is a vital distinction, and there is a real-world cautionary tale that illustrates the danger of confusing memory with mastery. It's the story of Kim Peek, who was the real-life inspiration for the movie Rain Man.
Oh, yeah. It's a fascinating and really heartbreaking story to read about.
It truly is. Kim was born without the corpus callosum. That is the thick bridge of nerve fibers that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain that allows us to communicate. Because of this unique missing neurological architecture, he was a true savant. He could reportedly recall every single word of the 12,000 books he had read in his lifetime.
Whole 1,000 books.
Yeah. And he could instantly tie those books to the exact dates he read them, the day of the week it was, and even tell you what the weather was like.
It's almost like his brain was a massive, infinite warehouse full of meticulously labeled files, but he completely lacked the operating system required to actually open or apply any of them in the real world.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the severe limitation of mere memory. Despite having this godlike recall, Kim's daily life was incredibly difficult. He lived with his father until he passed away at the age of 58.
Wow.
He was completely unable to navigate basic household chores, process simple social cues, or live independently. His brain could store everything, but it could compile nothing.
So memory alone does not equal mastery. You can store the entire French dictionary in your head and still not know how to order a coffee in Paris without freezing up.
Exactly. And while Kim's situation was neurological, the lesson applies to all of us. This is what our source calls the 99% trap. We mistake the consumption and hoarding of information for actual learning. We think because we read the book and highlighted the important quotes, we have mastered the skill. True mastery compiling the knowledge into actionable neural pathways requires 3 specific tools: the timer, the text, and the tools.
I really want to look closely at the test here, because traditional education has conditioned us from childhood to study our absolute brains out for 6 unbroken months, all leading up to one giant, terrifying final exam.
Right, the classic model.
Or in the corporate world, working for a whole quarter for one massive presentation. Why is the source arguing that this is biologically a giant waste of time?
Because it completely ignores how humans actually build competency and correct errors. Our source points to the software engineering world, specifically the Agile development approach.
Oh, sure. Agile.
In Agile, they don't spend a year building a product in the dark and then just pray it works on launch day. Everything is broken down into rapid learn test loops. They work in 2-week sprints, or at modern AI companies, single-day sprints.
You learn a tiny piece, you test it immediately to see if it breaks, and you adjust your mental model before moving on.
Exactly. You shouldn't be testing yourself at the end of the year. You should be testing yourself at the end of the hour. And to manage those hours, you use the timer.
Which is based on biology, right?
Yes, based on a biological reality called the ultradian rhythm. Human biology operates in roughly 90-minute cycles of peak alertness. You get 90 minutes of intense, focused, deep work where your prefrontal cortex is firing perfectly, and then you absolutely must follow it with 20 minutes of protected rest to replenish the glucose.
So that 90-minute sprint is the rhythm, but what do we actually do during those 90 minutes to compile the skill? The source outlines 3 specific ways to use the tools, and the first one is called the slow burn.
Slow burn is essential for physical skills, like playing the guitar, learning a tennis serve, or even typing. You practice the physical micro moves excruciatingly slowly.
Like painfully slow.
Yes, but the key is the conscious engagement. It is easy to zone out when you are moving at 10% speed. You cannot let your brain turn off.
You have to pay attention.
Right. You have to maintain intense, conscious focus on every millimeter of the movement. You are deliberately writing the code for the muscle memory into your basal ganglia.
So the slower you play, the faster you learn because you aren't practicing your mistakes.
Exactly.
Tool number 2 is immersion. And anyone who has ever practiced a speech in their bathroom can relate to this. You stand in front of the mirror, you sound like a genius, you hit every inflection perfectly.
Oh, we've all been there.
Then you step onto a stage in front of 50 people, the lights hit you, your heart rate spikes, and you completely freeze. You literally forget your own name.
Because environments change everything. Neuroscientists call this context-dependent memory. If you only practice in a safe, quiet room, your brain links the retrieval of that information to the safety and specific cues of that room.
That makes so much sense.
Right. When the context changes, the neural pathway gets blocked by the stress response. You have to test in the arena. You have to introduce the stress and the environmental variables of the real world into your practice so your brain learns to access the information under pressure.
And finally, tool number 3, which the source calls the boss tool. Teach to learn.
This is the ultimate crucible for understanding. When you try to teach a concept, you are forced to internalize it, restructure it, and reframe it in your own words. You simply cannot hide behind someone else's jargon.
You have to know it.
Exactly. Our source suggests lecturing to a blank wall or standing in your living room giving a fake TED Talk. If you stumble while explaining it out loud to an empty room, you've immediately found the gap in your compilation. You know exactly what you need to go back and review.
Okay, so you've compressed the massive map of data into chunks. You've compiled it through these intense 90-minute sprints, testing it with slow burns and fake TED Talks. You feel like you've been working incredibly hard.
You're exhausted.
Right. But here is the most counterintuitive part of the entire deep dive. The actual physical rewiring of your brain, the moment the learning sets in and becomes permanent, doesn't happen while you are grinding. It happens when you completely stop.
This requires us to view learning as a strict 2-stage process. Stage 1 is the focus, the friction, the 90-minute block. But all that focus is merely sending a request to your brain to rewire.
Just a request.
Stage 2 is the rest, and the rest is when the actual biological consolidation happens.
So all those people relying on flashcards and cramming all night, trying to maximize every single second of input.
They're getting terrible long-term returns because they are sending a million requests to rewire, but never giving the brain the biological downtime required to actually lay the cables. We have to understand the mechanics of rest at 3 distinct levels: the micro, the macro, and the super macro.
Let's break those down because the micro level absolutely blew my mind. What is happening during the micro level?
The micro level happens inside your 90-minute focus block. Research shows that if you take spontaneous 10 to 20-second pauses, just completely stopping for a few seconds, your brain subconsciously replays the information you just learned at 10 to 20 times the normal speed.
Wait, really? 10 to 20 times?
Yes. It might fire that exact neural sequence 20 times over in those few seconds. You are literally getting 20 free repetitions of practice just by staring out the window for 15 seconds.
That is unbelievable. 10 to 20 times the speed just by pausing. And then we have the macro level, which is what happens after the 90-minute block is over.
Right. Remember the old ultradian rhythm. After 90 minutes of burning glucose, you need 20 minutes of rest. But it cannot be scrolling on your phone, reading the news, or watching a video.
It has to be real rest.
It must be what neuroscientists call NSDR, non-sleep deep rest, or yoga nidra.
Basically doing absolutely nothing. And there is a real physical mechanism here, right? Because when you do NSDR, you are intentionally lowering your heart rate while maintaining just a sliver of consciousness.
Exactly.
And by doing that, you are actively flushing cortisol out of your system, which allows your hippocampus, the brain's short-term memory center, to start transferring all that new data into the neocortex for long-term storage.
Precisely. You are allowing the nervous system to shift from a sympathetic, driven state into a parasympathetic, restorative state. If you flood the system with new stimuli, like a smartphone screen during those 20 minutes, you interrupt the transfer.
The brain just drops it.
The hippocampus just dumps the data.
And then the final level, the super macro level, is just a good night's sleep, which, we all know is important, but the mechanism here is wild. The research says our brain replays everything we learned during the day in reverse.
Yes. During specific phases of deep sleep, the brain replays the day's neural activations in reverse order. Researchers believe this reverse replay is critical for solidifying those new networks into long-term storage and integrating them with past memories.
That is so cool.
It is. If you cut your sleep short to study more, you are literally interrupting the save process on your brain's hard drive. You are doing the work and then unplugging the computer before it saves.
So what does this all mean? It brings to mind an analogy from the source about farming. It's incredibly simple but profound. You can be the hardest working farmer on earth. You can wake up before dawn. You can plow the field every single day over and over again, refusing to take a day off.
But if you do that,
you will destroy the soil.
Yeah.
The ground inherently has to rest to regain its biological fertility.
This raises an important question, doesn't it? In our post-industrial, hyper-technological age, we have completely conditioned ourselves to forget this basic, intuitive law of nature.
We really have.
We treat our minds like combustion engines that should run at 100% capacity until they break, rather than biological ecosystems that require seasons of rest to yield a crop.
It's a complete paradigm shift for how we approach our days. So as you look to escape the orbit of the ordinary and actually apply this methodology to your own life, what are the final mindset adjustments you need to take with you?
There are a few core rules to synthesize here. First, you have to stop racing other people. In a globally connected world, there is always someone who appears to be learning faster or achieving more.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
The loop of comparison is infinite and toxic. Your only valid metric for competition is your yesterday self.
Compete with who you were 24 hours ago.
Second, you have to get out of your own head while you are in the focus block. You cannot be the performer and the critic at the exact same time.
Oh, that's a great point.
When you are learning, just perform. Embrace the friction. Let it be messy. Save the critical evaluation for later. And finally, you have to honor the rhythm of the ocean. Learning is not a straight upward graph. It has ebbs and flows.
Right.
If you compress smartly, compile with intense sprints, and rigorously protect your consolidation time, there is nothing you cannot learn.
It really is a powerful system, and it makes you rethink every hour you've ever spent studying. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on that wild fact about how our brains consolidate information. If it is scientifically proven that our brains need to replay information at 10 to 20 times the speed during microbreaks and physically solidify it in reverse while we sleep, what happens to the collective knowledge of a modern society that has actively decided to eliminate empty moments?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Think about a culture that sacrifices sleep to hustle and fills every spare 10 seconds in an elevator or at a red light with a glowing smartphone screen. Are we accidentally pausing our own cognitive evolution by refusing to just sit and rest? Think about that the next time you try to pour a gallon into a 4-ounce bowl. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.